Okay, welcome back to Level 6 Math. Today we're going to do Saxon Math lesson number 33. This is on writing percents as a fraction, part 1, which means we're going to keep working on this throughout the term, but today we're going to get started with the basic stuff. Okay, so we've done this before with fraction manipulatives. I think in investigation 2 we started looking at that with taking a circle, and if we cut it in half, we could write it as 1/2, or we could do it as 50%. And just like our math facts, the quicker you can learn some of the basic fractions, what 1/2 is in percents, what 1/3 is, what 1/4, 1/5, etc., the more of those that you know, the faster it's going to be to do your math. And so just like learning your basic times tables is going to make doing other multiplication problems and division problems a lot faster. So will learning your basic percentiles. Okay, so a percent is actually a fraction with a denominator of 100. In English, we say percent, and that doesn't mean a lot, but it's Latin based. Percent means of or per 100, per 100. So in other languages, like in Spanish, it's por ciento, which literally means of 100. And so it's a lot easier in some of those Latin based languages, French, Spanish, Portuguese, etc., to understand what percent means. We're just not used to it in the United States. We just put a little symbol after something, but it just means out of 100. So it's a way of taking a number and transferring it into something that is kind of universally recognized. Out of 100, it's easier to make comparisons if everything's in percent instead of in ratios. Okay, so here we can use a grid to see it visually. 50% would be 50 out of 100 boxes. That's 50%. So 50 out of 100, and we would write that as 50 over 100, which reduces to 1/2. In 25, we would just have 25 highlighted, and that would be 25 out of 100, and that would reduce to 1/4. Now, when we reduce, like with 25 out of 100 or 50 out of 100, what we're doing is we're looking for the greatest common factor. So if we know there's a number that goes into both 50 and 100, then we will divide it by that number. In this case, we know that 50 goes into 100. So we could use that as our number, our greatest common factor. 50 divided by 50 is 1. 100 divided by 50 is 2. And that's how we reduce without taking extra steps. Now, if we can't remember the greatest common factor and we don't want to write it all out and get all the factors and circle the greatest common factor, usually the easiest thing to do, especially if it's an even number, is just start dividing by 2. So we could take 50 divided by 2, 100 divided by 2, that'd give us 50 divided by 2 is 25 over 50, and 25 divided by 50, now it's not an even number. Well, we know 25 and 50 are both multiples of 5, so now we can divide by 5. And so 25 divided by 5 is 5, and 50 divided by 5 is 10. Then we get 5 over 10. And then at that point, we're like, oh yeah, 5 and 10, greatest common factor is 5. So we can just divide by 5. That's a lot of mental work to do, and that's why we're practicing. Okay? So let's do it here. Benjamin's class, 60% of the students walk to school, write 60% as a fraction. Remember, 60 of 100, or per 100, would simply be 60 over 100. So we'd write that as 60 over 100. You could draw it out if you want to spend all day drawing a picture. It's not going to help you solve this any faster. I don't know why they even give that as an example. But I guess you can visualize 60 out of 100. 60 is the bigger part. And then the greatest common factor here, if we're thinking about 60 and 100, they can both be divided by 20. That's the greatest common factor. So 60 divided by 20 is 3. 100 divided by 20 is 5. So 3/5 is our reduced fraction. Again, if you can't do that in your head, just take 60 and 100 and say, well, let's divide that by 2. So that gives us 30 over 50. Once we get to 30 over 50, those are both multiples of 10, so we can just take the zeros off, and that would be 3 over 5. So it can take a few small steps to reduce. Start with the greatest common factor you can, but if you can't, reduce it by any common factor, and then the greatest common factor from there. Okay? What's the reduced fraction that equals 4%? 4 of 100, so it's just 4 over 100, and then that reduces. The greatest common factor here would be 4. 4 goes into 100, so 4 divided by 4 is 1. 100 divided by 4 is 25, and that's how we get 1/25. But if you can't remember that, again, they're both even numbers. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 100 divided by 2 is 50. 2 over 50, those are both still even numbers, so divide them by 2, and then you get 50 divided by 2 is 25, 2 divided by 2 is 1, 1 over 25. Okay? That's it. This one is one that, the reducing part's the hard part. Actually changing it over 100, that's easy. But the reducing is something that students get hung up on. So it takes practice, but just remember, you're looking for the greatest common factor. And if you can't, just find any common factor, reduce it from there, and then think, are there still common factors? And the big clue is if the top and the bottom numbers are both even, you can always reduce, okay? So get in the habit of reducing all the time. All right, good luck.